Here he is, former Vancouver Canuck TSN hockey analyst, the one and only Mr. Frank Corrado. How we doing, Frankie?
I'm good. How you guys doing?
Good. Great. I mean, off season at hand here, draft at hand, free agency at hand. This is what we wait for between April each and every Canucks season. You know, the Canucks finish playing, and then everybody starts pointing to the draft and free agency. So this is our time of year here on the West Coast.
Yeah, it's time. You know what? It's time to get things going, and it's been a long while until since things were actually relevant for the Canucks. They were out of the playoff picture. And the playoffs went by, and now it's okay, how's this team going to shape up next year? There's been some moves that have happened that maybe caught people by surprise. I'm sure they've been welcome moves, but it's going to heat up for the Canucks here in the next little while.
And before we get to the big changes, including the OEL buyout, let's just start with a Bodog poll question. You cover CHL hockey for TSN. You know a lot of the players, particularly in the early part of this first round. What do you think? Do you think there's a case for the Canucks to want to move up in this draft? And who do you think they would want to move up for number 11?
I think there's definitely a case for them wanting to move up. I will say that, you need to have something that the team moving down really wants from you. And the Canucks are in a place where they have some assets that are maybe not as desirable. They have some money that they need to get off the books, which would be more of a priority than trying to give away good assets to move up in the draft. But, I mean, if you move up, you're probably looking at one of those American players, right, that are really highly touted. There's that American line with, Leonard, Smith, and I can't remember who else is on that line right now. But it's those are the kind of players you're looking for, Michkov. I just saw Bob McKenzie had Michkov at 5 on his rankings. There's so much noise around him and when he's going to be able to come over. I listen, I don't have a problem if they were going to move up and try and make a splash that way. But at 11, you're going to get a very good player. It's a deep draft. And I think going further into the first round, I think you're going to see a lot of good players that end up playing meaningful NHL minutes down the road.
What are the chances, do you think, guys, that there's a Pavel Bure-like element to the Mishkov trade? Nobody thought that Pavel Bure was eligible to be drafted. What are the chances somebody drafts Mishkov and they get him here before 2026? Is that just off the table? Do you think anybody's done any work behind the scenes here to make that happen?
I actually don't know. I know you can get out of KHL contracts, but it is quite difficult. I got out of my contract basically because I said, listen, I'm hurt. I'm not coming back there to play. It doesn't make sense. So basically what we did was, I basically fired myself. I didn't have to buy myself out. There's been players that have had to buy themselves out of their deals, which is very expensive, and you don't want to end up doing that. But if you could just have a clean split, clean breakup, that's great. I doubt Michkov is one of those guys. I think they want to keep him there as long as they possibly can, not to mention the team that he's under contract with. I believe it's St. Petersburg. That's a team that wants to win every single year, and I think there's big financial rewards for the organization and the team if they do win. So it would be very, very complex. I remember one year we were out in Penticton, and there was this little Russian guy playing for the Oilers. His last name started with a T. They wanted to sign him to an NHL deal, and then they realized he wasn't eligible, so he had to go back to Russia. And then the LA Kings ended up signing him years later. I think it was Takchev, something like that. It's something with it.
Yeah, I remember him. Yep.
Yeah. So there's weird things that I think the Oilers signed him, put pen to paper, and they were like, no, actually, this guy's actually not eligible. So stranger things have happened.
Yeah, just going back, it's Gabe Perreault is the third member of that USA line with Will Smith, who Bob McKenzie has number 4 overall, Ryan Leonard, who McKenzie has 6 overall. He's got Perreault at 10, and then there's the American centerman Oliver Moore at 13. Who knows? We've had a lot of talk about McGillney here in the last 24, 48 hours. Maybe Michkov can slip out of Russia.
Defection.
Old school Alex McGillney. Defection style. Our first chance to talk to you, Frankie, since the OEL buyout. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm surprised that they actually did it, but I guess I would imagine they tested the market enough to see if there was a trade, and that wasn't going to happen. And it is uncharacteristic of the Canucks and the organization there to pay players to not play for them, but this is where they are. OEL was not going to give them the value of what that contract was worth. And maybe at $2 million, he's a better player and fits a need for a team that way. It never really made sense in the first place, bringing that player on and having him, at that point in his career. And the crazy thing was, like, the players they traded, they were about to get under those contracts. Like, they were so close to the finish line on those contracts, and then they took on more bad money. It never made sense. It was so short-sighted for where the team was, and it just kind of goes to show you that fallacy. It's like, oh, you just got to get in and maybe you have a chance to win. Well, like, no, it's not true. You have to actually be good. Listen, Oliver Ekman-Larsson has had a lot of injury trouble over the course of his career. That hasn't helped things. So, for him, hopefully he stays healthy. He can find a spot somewhere making $2 million and provide value to the team that way. But the Canucks needed to clear some money. They are able to digest this and swallow it. Now they have some money to spend, and they're going to have to spend it on the back end, because as much as Oliver Ekman-Larsson didn't maybe live up to the contract value, he's an NHL defenseman, and he logged a lot of minutes for that team. And maybe there's an upgrade to be had, and there really has to be, because that's still, regardless of what you think of the player and what he was in Vancouver, that's going to be a pretty large void that they need to fill.
What do you spend on Oliver Ekman-Larsson if you're an acquiring team right now? What are you willing to what is his NHL value right now?
I really think it's whatever's going to make him whole on his contract. I think when these guys get bought out, they're just looking at it like, okay, like, what's going to make me get to my dollar amount that I was making before? So it's, it's going to cost the Canucks $2 something on the cap right now. Like, I think he's in and around that $2 million range just to make sure that he's whole after. And I think at $2 million, like, you look at some of the guys, like Ilya Lyubushkin last year signed for 2.7 as a free agent. Eric Goodbranson signed for $4 million. Like, if these are some of the numbers that are getting thrown around for D-men in the league, I would happily have Oliver Ekman-Larsson on my team at $2 million, play him on the third pair, maybe get him some power play minutes. I think that would be good value for a player like that.
Hey, he had $30 million left. He's going to get $20 million of it, so he's got to make $10 more million over the course of his NHL career to be whole. And that's
a big ask.
Well, it's a big ask, but I mean, he's still young. That's the one thing we forget, is there's so many miles on the body. This isn't like a 35-year-old guy. Completely in the twilight, even if the twilight hit a little early for him. Before we leave the Vancouver Canucks and defense, I thought there was a really interesting comment yesterday from Patrick Alvin when discussing Tyler Myers, who he acknowledged he thinks he will be here this season. He talked about how Adam Foote and Sergei Gonchar were working with Myers for, quote, a better understanding of where the puck was going to go. Frankie, talk defense to me. Please translate that for us. A guy's got 918 games, and he's being worked with on where the puck was going to go.
Yeah, no kidding. Like, I wish a lot of guys, myself included, just got spoon-fed like that. Like, here's where the puck's going to go here. Here's where... Like, the first thing I wonder is, what were all the other coaches doing? Yeah. Right? Like, how did you not grasp that along the way? Especially not so much when he was a veteran guy in Vancouver, but like a younger guy. Like, how do you not work with that guy early on in his career to establish that? But what Alvin is, I think, saying when he says that is, like, we need this guy to play a little smarter. Like, like that's how I get it. It's like, here, man, like, just think a little bit, use your hockey sense, and puck's probably going to go here. You can maybe cut down your skating a little bit because the puck is going to come to you. One thing, like, coaches used to say to me, and actually Babcock said this a lot, and it is true. In the NHL as a D-man, the puck just seems to funnel to you a lot of times. And there's certain spots you can kind of like hang out on the ice. Like, I wasn't very good at this because I was always one of those guys that was like over eager to like get into a battle and be like, always wanted to be super assertive. And that kind of hurt me. But where I saw the guys really excel, like the guys that really established themselves and played minutes upon minutes, year after year, it was like they were very efficient in how they kind of thought the game. I would imagine that's what they're trying to do with him. It's like the old saying, let the game come to you, right? Like, the puck's always going to funnel to the net. I think those are things that he probably needs to get in his game a little bit more. I actually think Sergei Gonchar would be a really good influence in that way. Like, so I actually had the opportunity to play for Sergei when he was with the Penguins. And a lot of the times, if I was, working after practice as a healthy scratch, I'd stay on with Gonchar. And like, I'd be going really hard, doing these drills, skating like crazy. And then he'd kind of look at me and goes, no, no, no. He goes, here's your path. They're going to skate right into you. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. In my head, it didn't make sense because I'm like, wait, man, like I need to work way harder than this. I need to just work really hard. And I was like, Gonch, you were like big points guy and this and that. He's like, no, but trust me. He goes, you don't have to be like a big points guy, a big, offensive guy or one-dimensional kind of guy. You just need to understand that like you put yourself in certain positions and guys are skating into you. And yet now you have a little more juice to go the other way and actually play offense. So I think that's probably what Gonchar is trying to instill in him. I don't think it's one of these things that like Tyler Myers is dumb. He's obviously not dumb. He's played over 900 games in the NHL. There's a certain level of intelligence that comes with that. But it's more just like thinking the game efficiently. And I think Gonchar will be able to help with that big time.
The Nick Lidstrom model, just being efficient. Is it possible that, and I'm not saying this is definite, but is it possible that a guy like Tyler Myers that has such great physical attributes that were given to him in terms of his own size, he was a great skater, which I'm sure he worked on early in his life, that maybe coaches never overcoached that guy because they just saw him hold so many great tools, but didn't really necessarily give him the toolbox a ton over the years?
Well, you can relate it this way, and I think that's a great point. Like, relate it to the kid that hits puberty before everyone else, right? And he's just bigger, faster, stronger, and doesn't really have to think very much because he just knows he's going to drop his shoulder, he's going to lean on you, and the other 12-year-olds can't do a thing. Fast forward a few years, and that kid, now everyone's caught up to him. Everyone's the same size. Everyone, has the same kind of speed. And you're like, where did that kid go? Like, he kind of got lost in the shuffle. Well, for too long, he was relying on his tools. And for Tyler Myers, he's massive. He uses a stick that's 14 feet tall. He's got a massive wingspan. So he has been able to rely on those things for a long time in his career. And when that starts to go, like if the foot speed starts to go a little bit and the game is speeding up, like I'm watching some of these crafty young guys now, like a guy like Jesper Bratt, like that guy is so elusive, so evasive, so hard. Like Jack Hughes is another guy, right? Like you're playing against these kind of guys now that are so slippery, able to get under your stick, get off checks. It's like, okay, now you need to start adapting a little bit and think the game a little more than maybe you have, because you can't just rely on, well, I'm massive and now I'm going to corner this guy and I got him and I'm going to pin him against the wall. Guess what? Now these guys that you're trying to pin against the wall, they're slippery, man. They slip it right through your skates and they're gone and they're the other way. So things have changed and players ultimately do need to adapt based on the conditions that are changing.
I was that 12-year-old.
Yeah.
Were you?
And look at you now. And look at you now.
I was the late bloomer. I got cut. I got cut in minor bantam from a team, and I was so weak. And I would make these like fluttery passes that wouldn't even make it to your stick. And I was
skinny Frank Corrado, right?
I was barely hanging on in AAA, and then from like my bantam year to my minor midget year, I started training and working out, and I went to like training camp, preseason tournament, and minor midget, and I was like, I'm actually fast now. Like, what happened here? Like, it just happened over one summer, and I'm like, hockey's fun again. It's funny. This is great. Yeah.
I did not train, and at 13, all the kids had caught up, if not bypassed me. The struggle was real from that point forward. Another interesting comment from Alvin yesterday, Frankie, talking about Boeser being at an age where he has to understand that things about his summer have to change. What can you tell me about that? Like, do you get to an age in the NHL where you go, okay, I can't rely on my talent just anymore. I have to make concerted efforts to work harder in the summer?
For sure. Look, I could never rely on my talent because I just didn't have enough of it. But what I did try and do was just work really hard. And for me, it was almost to a fault. Like I almost would get stressed out if I ever had to miss a workout or miss a skate, or if I was under the weather. It was like I had to force myself to be at every single thing. And maybe that's not the way to be either. But I will say, when you hear comments like that, Usually for veteran players, I've found, like the guys that I've trained with, it goes the other way where they are like working so hard as young guys, 20, 21, 22, like they're lifting a ton of weight, they're running like crazy, they're pushing massive numbers on the bike, and then as time goes on, they establish themselves in the league, and then it turns into more of a maintenance game. Then it's all, guys start getting in, yeah, I got to stay flexible. I got to make sure I'm, pliable. I'm doing more plyometrics this time around. Maybe I'm doing some yoga, some Pilates. I'm still lifting a little bit, but not the way I was back when I was younger. That's the way it usually goes. When I hear those kind of comments, the first thing that comes to mind for me is what's your lifestyle like in the summer? So is it like, do you wake up in the morning and first thing you do is have a quick breakfast, go to the gym, go have a skate, and then your day is done at like 2 p.m. and then you're recovering for the next day? Like, I'm not saying you can't have fun. It's the summer. It's the time to have fun. But what I am saying, it's like you need that kind of like consistency and that kind of regiment where it's like every day, this is what I'm doing. That's my main event. Everything else is after that. So it's, you hear comments like that, and you kind of think, okay, like there's just something that needs to happen. I don't know if it's within the training or if it's like the on ice stuff, or maybe how you're compounding the two together. But, and I don't want to go there, but it just sounds like it needs to be more of like a rigid kind of structure when you hear comments like that.
Finally, there's the case of Ethan Bear for the Vancouver Canucks, who goes to the Worlds, gets injured, has no contract as an RFA player, and he was merely fine last year as a Vancouver Canuck. He was probably destined to come back. They spent capital to get him, so they probably wanted to see him again, but now they have some leverage. What do you think happens with Ethan Bear? What's the number, and how uncomfortable would that be for a player? You want to be attached to a team right now. You want their resources in your rehabilitation, but you're a free agent. I mean, this can't be a fun place to be for Ethan Bear.
I fully expect them to squeeze him. Like, I really do. I think they're going to squeeze him as much as they possibly can. I actually don't know the number. I haven't dug into what the AAV could be for next year. And it's
QO is 2.2, by the way. QO is 2.2. Yeah.
So it was 2.2. So, I mean, listen, like, they're going to try and squeeze him as much as they possibly can. And there's a few players around the league that are in that kind of realm where it's like, okay, you've been hurt a lot in years past. Maybe you're going to have a delayed start to the regular season. Like, I actually had a similar situation where I tore my ACL and I wasn't going to be able to play until November. And I remember getting some phone calls, and, my agent was like, why don't you talk to the AGM, explain what's going on? And I was like, here's the situation. And it went from, hey, we're very interested in you, but we're not going to sign you now if you're going to be available in November. We're going to sign our guys and we'll reach out down the road and we'll see where we're at. He's an NHL player. He can serve a purpose. I think he played well in Edmonton. I think he played well in Carolina. Vancouver was not a great defensive team last year, so it's hard to put a lot of stock into that, especially when you have the breakdowns that you have. I do think Ethan Bear is a good player, and I would imagine for the Canucks, a team that I don't want to say is desperate, but needs defensemen, like NHL caliber defensemen who can move the puck with some kind of flair, have some kind of offensive upside, can play some defensive minutes. It's probably worth it for them to have that guy sign, let him rehab with the team. And ultimately, it'll be up to the player to say, okay, I'm going to swallow this. It's going to suck. It's not how much money I think I should make or deserve to make. But then you move on from there. It happens. It sucks that it happens, but it's kind of the way it goes.
Lastly, Frankie, I mean, we could put 12 names on the list easily. The trade market seems so flush with defensemen, and most of them would be bona fide top fours. Some would be fringy top fours. I mean, Carlson, Hanifin, Pesce, Parayko, Falk, Grzelcyk, Peak, Gerard, Forbert, on it goes. Is there a defenseman out there on the trade market that you think suits the Vancouver Canucks, or you think the Canucks should target?
I haven't really been looking at the trade market for them because they're going to have to make a move, and there's a lot of moving parts with that. I do expect there to be a lot of trades this time around. I've kind of been looking at the UFA market, and what I kind of see is maybe there's a couple players that need to prove something, and they can do that in Vancouver this year. And the two players that come to mind is Matt Dumba, who's coming off $6 million. He had a down year last year. At one point, he was healthy scratch, not normal for a $6 million player. Now I start to wonder, okay, it's not a great UFA class as far as D-men goes, so maybe he is in high demand. But maybe it turns into one of those things where Dumba looks at it and says, okay, if I'm not going to get my number at 6, do I want to attach term to a lesser number, or do I want to just take 1 year at a lesser number and really try and catapult myself so I can get back to 6 at 4 years, something like that? Like, you'd be betting on yourself. It would be risky, especially when you do have term attached. But maybe that's a situation that presents itself. And why wouldn't you say, okay, like, there's an opportunity for you here to play with Quinn Hughes. We have some good offensive pieces. You're going to have a really good goaltender behind you. Rick Tocchet, like, a lot of players really like playing for Rick Tocchet. Like, I can see the sales pitch there happening.
Who did that last offseason? Was it
Klingberg?
Well,
Klingberg.
That's the
Although
next
he got
guy.
a lot of money.
Klingberg did it last year, and it didn't work out well for him because he couldn't get the long-term attached with a lot of money. Like, it wasn't there for him. So he took 1 year at $7 million, go to Anaheim. It was a disaster in Anaheim. And now I wonder for him, okay, he tried that. He rolled the dice. He had a bad year. He pouted all year in Anaheim. What's he going to get now? Like, he's got to be looking at a 1 year deal. I don't know. It's definitely not $7 million anymore. Is it 4.5? Like that's, so there's some players there that maybe I don't know, want to call it a flyer, but there's players with something to prove. And there's players, they can both move the puck pretty well. Dumba is a punishing hitter who can play in your top 4. Klingberg probably needs to be sheltered a little bit. And I'm not saying these are home run solutions for the Canucks, but what they are is they're viable options that aren't going to cost you anything in a trade.
Great stuff. Hey, Frankie, we are less than a week away from the draft, and you'll be joining us next Thursday after we get through rounds 2 through 7. And with some insight, let's hope, on some of the CHL players that the Canucks have selected. Thanks for this.
Thanks.
This great clip brought to you by, wait for it, Great Clips. It's going to be great.